back to the drop-in with the Premier. You're present, Mr Alhar's present, and the Premier's present, correct?
Yes.
Anyone else present?
Not that I recall.
And what was discussed during the course of that drop-in?
It was greetings, niceties. My recollection, it was less than 2 minutes that we were there to say hello. Premier was working at a desk. That's my recollection, and we were gone.
Was there any discussion of any matters relating to planning?
No.
Was there, whether that be in a general policy sense or in a site-specific sense?
No, it was general niceties. That is my best recollection.
But Mr Alhar had been on at you for months to set up a meeting with the Premier and the Minister for Planning. He gets his meeting not with the Minister for Planning, but with the Chief of Staff to the Minister for Planning. And by the sounds of it, he's at you during the course of having a glass or two of red to say, let's see the Premier, let's see the Premier, let's see the Premier.
My recollection...
He's saying he doesn't take the opportunity then to complain to her about something that he was complaining to you about for months, which was the problems that he was having in the planning area.
No, my recollection is that he was satisfied. Mr Vella and him had discussions. He was quite satisfied. But as the evening wore on, he became, let's go and see Glad. And the conversation was very short. I'm sure, was probably less than 2 minutes. I don't even think a photo was taken, which is what you'd normally do in a drop-in. And that was it. We were gone.
Say to Mr Alhar in advance, look, we'll try and do this drop-in, but whatever you do, don't talk about the project that you've been talking to me about for weeks and months.
I could have cautioned him.
You don't have any recollection of actually
I don't
doing
have
that,
any.
do you?
No, I don't. But
you're saying it was a short meeting of a few minutes.
Oh,
and,
yes.
And there was nothing to do with planning discussed at all, was it?
Not that I recall. We stood. We stood, said hello. Look, it would have been less than 2 minutes. That's my best recollection. And it was just general niceties, Commissioner. That's, greetings and that's it.
Is that the only occasion on which you have taken a developer for a drop-in with the Premier or with another member of the Ministry?
It's the only one I recall.
No other ones you can think of?
No.
Now, other than the matters that we've discussed before, do you agree that you also provide Mr Alhar with assistance to get either him or his planning people at meetings with relevant individuals who might be able to discuss the problems that he was having in what I'll call the planning area?
You mean people from planning departments, etc., through the Minister's office?
Things of that kind, yes.
Yes, I did assist, yes.
And so just by way of an example, can we go please to volume 14, page 134? And I want to show you something that looks, at least to me, like an example of something of that kind. Here, a letter to the Honourable Anthony Roberts, MP, Minister for Planning and certain other portfolios. Dear Minister, please find enclosed correspondence received from Matt Daniel of Pacific Planning in relation to Beamish, Beamish Street, Campsie. See that there?
Yes.
That was one of Mr Alhar's projects, correct?
Correct.
And Mr Daniel was Mr Alhar's planner, is that right?
Yes.
And then you say it would be appreciated if an appointment can be made with one of your planning officers to speak with Matt Daniel at a mutually convenient time. See that there?
Yes.
And you sign it towards the bottom and add, perhaps ambitiously, this week would be good. Do you see that there? And so is this an example of the kind of assistance you would provide to Mr Alhar? In a sense, something in the nature of a shortcut which might allow the Minister for Planning or perhaps another minister to cause their officers to organise prompt meetings with relevant government officials?
Yes, it's a way of communicating that, yes.
And why did you provide this service or assistance to Mr Alhar?
Because he was having difficulties and he wanted to meet, and I suggested it would be far better for him to have his planners and others to meet and meet with the minister's staff or whoever he nominated to try and work through some of the issues, give them advice.
But what's it got to do with you? You're the member for Wagga. you're a parliamentary secretary for a series of portfolios, not including planning. Why are you getting involved in assisting in what appears to be an attempt to have something in the nature of a shortcut, get the Minister's office involved so that we can get a prompt meeting this week would be good?
Yes, I've been friends with Joe for a long time, and I did it out of friendship.
Well, have you ever sent a letter like the one that we saw on the screen, not so much out of friendship, but because you were hoping that in the event that a property development got off the ground, you would end up with a fee yourself?
He never promised me anything. I had no agreements.
Well, let's put Mr Alhar aside. What about other property developers? Have you ever assisted a property developer by sending a letter of the kind that we saw on the screen a moment ago,
Yes.
with a view to assisting some other property developer getting relevant approvals to be able to allow a project to proceed?
I've assisted a number of developers, yes.
And when you assisted those other developers, you did it in the hope that ultimately there might be some profits flowing to you. Do you agree?
Not entirely, but
Is that at least a factor that weighed on your mind in relation to, if not Mr Alhar, then the other developers
Could have been,
to whom
yes.
you've just identified?
could have been, yes.
Or could have been, or was?
Could have been, yes.
Well, not just could have been, it was. Do you agree?
Yes.
And so can we have a look at an example of that? Can we go please to volume...
You want to tender that last?
I do. I'm grateful for the reminder, Commissioner. I tender letter from Daryl Maguire to the Honourable Anthony Roberts, MP, 17 September 2017, pages 134 through to 137, volume 14, Public Inquiry Brief.
That'll be Exhibit 356.
And just before we go to that volume 15 document, I apologise to the operator, but we'll just go to page 140 of volume 14, just to see how that particular matter played out. Now, is it right that that letter that we saw on the screen a moment ago actually resulted in a meeting taking place?
I can't recall, but...
Well, this will help you.
Mm-hmm.
You see there, Minister Roberts says to you, "Thank you for your representations on behalf of Matt Daniel and his development. Mr Daniel met with the Department of Planning and Environment representatives on 28th of February 2017, etc., etc." And then the final paragraph says, "I've asked the department's urban renewal team to ensure Mr Daniel is kept fully informed of the progress of its work." See that there?
Yes, I see that.
And so is it right to say this provides an example of the kind of assistance that you've provided from time to time, not just to Mr Alhar, but to other developers, with a view to, in effect, shortcutting what might otherwise be a bureaucratic process to do things like setting up meetings and things of that kind?
Well, I wouldn't say exactly shortcutting, but certainly, yes.
If you wouldn't use the word shortcut, what word would you use?
Well, anyone can write to a minister and seek the same thing as I did.
Well, that's true, but you weren't a general member of the public. You were writing on your Member of Parliament letterhead, correct?
Correct.
And you'd agree, wouldn't you, that you were lending the weight of your office as a Member of Parliament by making representations to the Minister, correct?
Yes.
And you'd agree, wouldn't you, that at least in the ordinary course, it will be easier for a Member of Parliament to procure a meeting for someone with a minister or with the minister's staff or even with the department than someone just off the street?
Yes,
right?
I agree.
A tender letter from the Honourable Anthony Roberts MP to Mr Maguire MP, 7 April 2017, page 140, volume 14, Public Inquiry Brief.
That'll be Exhibit 357.
So can we now go to volume 15, page 48?
While we're doing that, did Minister Roberts ever ask you the sort of questions Mr Robertson just asked you? I.e., why are you advocating for somebody in relation to property in Campsie, which is a long way from Wagga?
No, Commissioner.
Did you ever tell him?
No.
Did you ever tell anyone within his office?
No.
Did you ever tell anyone, either him or anyone from his office, something to the effect of, I'm making these representations in part because Mr Alhar's a mate?
I may have mentioned that. I may have.
Would you have a recollection of that, or are you speculating as to whether you did or not?
I'm speculating.
Did you ever inform Minister Roberts or any other minister you wrote to with representations on behalf of developers, or any ministerial staff in respect of whom you made representations on behalf of developers that you were hoping that you might make a commission or other fee in the event that the development was successful?
No.
Go to volume 15, page 48. You agree you should have disclosed that though, don't you?
Well, in hindsight, yes.
Well, not just in hindsight. At that point in time, you realised that you were lending the weight of your office as a Member of Parliament to particular development projects in areas other than the electorate of Wagga Wagga, correct?
Yes.
And you realised that if you lent the weight of your office, including by writing letters on parliamentary letterhead, they would be more likely to get closer attention than if they were letters that were written to the people by the developers or perhaps their planners directly. Okay?
Yes.
And it didn't occur to you in the face of that you should at least have told the proposed recipients of these letters, I'm not just doing this in my capacity as a Member of Parliament for the electorate of Wagga Wagga. In part, I'm writing you this letter because I'm hoping that I'll make some money out of it at the end of the day.
Didn't occur to me.
You at least realise now that you ought to have,
Yes.
at the very least, disclosed that matter,
Yes,
correct?
I do. Yes.
And indeed, you ought not have written any of this kind of correspondence on parliamentary letterhead at all. Do you agree?
I agree.